Well,
I found a statement starting, Jason.
Secretary Theresa May.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement on the independent panel inquiry into child abuse, which has been established to consider whether institutions in England and Wales have taken seriously their duty of care to protect children from sexual abuse. The House will remember that in July I made a statement in which I announced my intention to establish the panel inquiry. I did so because of the growing evidence of organised child sexual abuse conducted over many years, and serious allegations about the failure of some of our most important institutions to protect children from this disgusting crime. I established a panel inquiry because it is the best way of making sure that the inquiry is conducted by a team of experts with empathy and sensitivity to the feelings of the survivors of child abuse. The fact that it is a panel consisting of several people means it has within it more expertise than any one person could offer. And importantly, the public can have extra confidence in the integrity of its work because no one individual can take important decisions or come to judgments alone. The members of the panel, Sharon Evans, Ivor Frank, Dame Moira Gibb, Barbara Hearn, Professor Jenny Pearce, Drew Sharpling, Professor Terence Stevenson and Graham Wilmer are in place, and they are supported by Ben Emerson QC, who is counsel to the inquiry, and Professor Alexis Jay, who is the panel's expert advisor. The panel therefore consists of members with a broad range of experience and skills. They have backgrounds in social care, academia, law enforcement, healthcare, the media and the voluntary sector, and some have experienced sexual abuse themselves as children. I believe that the panel can command the confidence of the public and, most importantly, of the survivors of child abuse. The House will know, however, that on Friday the panel's chairman, Fiona Woolf, announced her intention to resign. She did so because, as she wrote in her letter to me, it has become clear that the inquiry, if she continued to chair it, would not have the widespread victim support it so desperately deserves and needs. Mr. Speaker, Fiona Woolf's resignation, of course, follows the resignation of the panel's first chairman, the noble and learned Lady Baroness Butler-Sloss. Both women, I do believe, had strong credentials to chair the inquiry. Baroness Butler-Sloss was the first female Lord Justice of Appeal, she was the President of the Family Division of the High Court, and she chaired the Cleveland Child Abuse Inquiry. Fiona Woolf is a leading lawyer and a former President of the Law Society. But for different, and in the end understandable reasons, both Baroness Butler-Sloss and Fiona Woolf concluded that they did not command the confidence of survivors. Almost 4 months after I announced my intention to establish a panel inquiry, it is obviously very disappointing that we do not yet have a panel chairman, and for that I want to tell survivors that I am sorry. To put it bluntly, Mr. Speaker, it will not be straightforward to find a chairman who has both the expertise to do this hugely important work and has had no contact at all with an institution or an individual about whom people have concerns. I still believe, however, it is possible to find somebody who is suitably qualified and can win the confidence of survivors. So I want to turn now to what I plan to do to recruit a new chairman. I myself will hold meetings with representatives of the survivors of child abuse starting next week. I have already had a number of discussions with the members of Parliament who have campaigned for an inquiry into child abuse. The honourable members for Birmingham Yardley, Brighton Pavilion, East Worthing and Shoreham, Richmond Park, Rochdale, Wells and West Bromwich East. And I will continue to have discussions with them. I will also discuss the appointment of the new panel chairman with the Shadow Home Secretary and the Right Honourable Member for Leicester East. And I have already agreed with the Right Honourable Member for Leicester East that the nominated panel chairman will attend a pre-confirmation hearing before the Home Affairs Select Committee. In the meantime, the panel will go about its important work. So I can tell the House that the panel will hold its first meeting on Wednesday the 12th of November and will meet every Wednesday thereafter until Christmas. The panel will organise other meetings that will discuss the different themes and issues covered by the inquiry, and attendance for these meetings for both panel members and expert witnesses will be set accordingly. In addition, the panel secretariat is planning 2 regional events that will be held before Christmas and another 4 that will be held in the new year. These regional events will provide an early opportunity for survivors to give their views about how the panel should go about its work. One matter that I know has been raised by some campaigners is whether the inquiry should become a statutory inquiry. The inquiry as it is constituted at present, like the inquiries into Hillsborough and the murder of Daniel Morgan, is a non-statutory inquiry. I have already said that the panel will have access to all government papers, reviews and reports it requests, and subject to the constraints imposed by any criminal investigations, it will be free to call witnesses from any organisation it deems appropriate. But as I said to the House in July, I want to make it clear that if the panel chairman deems it necessary, the government is prepared to convert it into a full statutory inquiry in line with the Inquiries Act. Another matter that has been raised is the terms of reference for the inquiry. Some say the terms are too broad, while others say the terms are too narrow. I do not propose to narrow the terms of reference because to do that would risk missing out in a fairly arbitrary manner some important institutions. Likewise, I do not propose to extend the terms of reference to include Northern Ireland, Scotland or the Crown dependencies. I will, however, discuss with the new panel chairman how we can make sure that the Hart inquiry in Northern Ireland and the Oldham inquiry in Jersey feed into the panel to make sure that no information and no institutions or individuals with a case to answer can fall through the cracks. I can also tell the House that the government is considering ways of trying to make the experience of giving evidence less traumatic for survivors. The panel will therefore take evidence not just in public and private meetings, but also remotely, with witnesses able to speak to panel members from their homes. The Secretariat to the inquiry is also in discussions with officials in the Department of Health and other organisations to make sure that counselling and support is available to survivors before and after they provide evidence to the inquiry. And to make sure there is an open channel of communication between survivors, the panel and the government, I will establish a survivor liaison group which will meet on a regular basis as long as the inquiry continues. I know that some members of the House have suggested that the government should publish today the Oneness report about the Home Office Permanent Secretary's investigation into the so-called Dickens dossier. I can tell the House that the Oneness report will be published next week. This is because it is about a separate but related matter to the work of the panel inquiry, and I want members of the public and the media to have time to scrutinise both this statement and the Oneness review properly. Mr. Speaker, in the midst of debate about names, structures and legal powers, we must always keep in mind the survivors of child abuse themselves. Because let us remember the events that prompted me to announce this historic inquiry into child abuse in the first place. There was the systematic abuse of vulnerable young girls in Derby, Rochdale, Oxford and other towns and cities across the country. Examples of celebrities abusing minors and getting away with it apparently because of their fame. And evidence that some of the most important institutions in the country, from the BBC to the NHS, failed in their duty of care towards children. Since I made my statement in July, the evidence has only mounted. We have seen the Alexis J report into abuse in Rotherham, and the report by the Honourable Member for Stockport, which was commissioned by Tony Lloyd, the Peace and Crime Commissioner for Greater Manchester. Both reports expose serious failings among the police, social services, schools and other institutions. And the obvious conclusion is that if only we'd learned from these appalling cases earlier, there would be fewer victims of abuse today. I believe the whole House will agree with me that we owe it to the survivors in all these cases to work together to let the panel inquiry do its job as quickly as possible and to start to learn the lessons of the many cases where undoubtedly too many things went horribly wrong. I want to end my statement by issuing a direct message to the many survivors of child abuse and their representatives. I know you have experienced terrible things. I know we cannot imagine what that must be like. And I know that perhaps because of the identity of your abusers or the way you were treated when you needed help, many of you have lost trust in the authorities. I know some of you have questioned the legitimacy of this process. I know you're disappointed that the panel has no chairman. I understand that. I am listening, and to you I say this. I am as determined as you are to get to the truth. That is why I set up this inquiry. We have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to do something that is hugely important. Together, we can expose what has gone wrong in the past. We can prevent it going wrong in the future. We can make sure people who thought they were beyond the reach of the law face justice. We can do everything possible to save vulnerable young children from the appalling abuse that you suffered and endured. Let us come together to make this process work and finally deliver justice for what you and too many others have suffered. I commend this statement to the House.
Yvette Cooper.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the Home Secretary's statement to the House today. 2 years ago this month, she came to the House to announce investigations into abuse in North Wales care homes. I asked her then if she would set up an overarching inquiry into child abuse, and in July of this year, she rightly agreed to do so and said that she wanted it to start as quickly as possible. 4 months later, that inquiry hasn't started, and it has been mired by confusion. So can I welcome the changes that she has announced today, and also her apology to survivors of abuse for the things that have gone wrong. This House will be united in our determination that this inquiry should get back on track. For too long, children have not been listened to when they called for help. From the BBC to the National Health Service, from care homes to the police, from local councils to national governments of all political parties, no institution or organisation should be complacent about how they may have failed in the past or might be failing even now to make sure that children are heard and protected, that criminals are brought to justice, that problems are not covered up, and that survivors get the support they need. And no one should be in any doubt of the deep damage abuse causes to those survivors for the rest of their lives. So to get the inquiry back on track, we also need to recognise the things that went wrong, because it is vital that it does not fail again. First, much more work is needed to involve survivors, and I welcome the further announcements the Home Secretary has made today. The Home Secretary was specifically asked in July by my honourable friend, the member for Rochdale, how survivors would be involved, and in July she said that that was up to the chairman of the inquiry. But I think that approach from the Home Office has been what's caused some of the current problems, because as she has recognised today, ministers need to engage directly themselves with survivors over the impartiality of the chair, over the work and purpose of the inquiry before it starts. So I welcome her commitment now to meet with survivors, particularly to develop additional support and counselling, and also to establish a survivors forum or liaison group to make sure that their voices are heard. She will know how important it is that this liaison group or forum works effectively. And will she specifically consult with survivors in those meetings on the terms of reference and on the issues the inquiry should focus on before it starts? Second, the choice of chair. Again, I welcome her proposals to consult more widely now. And will she ignore those siren voices who say it isn't possible to find someone who isn't a close contact of those whose decisions may be investigated by the inquiry? She will know that other sensitive inquiries have managed to do important work without going wrong and without being derailed, including the Hillsborough and Soham inquiries and including the current Northern Ireland inquiry into child abuse. Third, transparency. The inquiry has to address concerns about whether there have been institutional cover-ups. So does she therefore agree with me that it was very unwise of Home Office officials to become involved in redrafting Fiona Woolf's letters? Could she tell the House whether ministers or special advisers saw those earlier letters or were involved in redrafting? And can she make sure that no one in the Home Office is involved in drafting any disclosure letters for the next chair? Can I welcome her announcement that the Oneness Review will be published next week? Will she make a statement to the House on it? She will know there will be considerable interest from all sides of the House. But this is also not just about the past. We know that abuse is happening now on an unacceptable scale. So will she also make sure there is much greater transparency on child protection work today, particularly the work of the National Crime Agency, to make sure that we are not making the same mistakes again and are not storing up more problems for children in future? And fourthly, on the progress of the inquiry now, I welcome her agreement to getting the panel moving before the chair is appointed and to keeping open the need for this to be a statutory inquiry, because it is vital that it can get access to all of the information and the testimony that it needs. Mr. Speaker, this is an extremely important inquiry, and the Home Secretary has done the right thing to recognise that things have gone wrong, and we will support her in the action needed and whatever it takes to get this back on track and to make sure that this inquiry works. But let me also urge her not to forget the scale and of the problem on child abuse and exploitation happening right now and the weaknesses in the child protection system today. We do need a fearless and robust examination of how children have been let down, and we will support her in making sure that that happens. But we also need strong action to protect children and make sure that they go heard in future. She is right, this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity, but it is too important not just for survivors, but also for our children today to make sure this historic opportunity is not lost.
Thank you, and I thank the Right Honourable Lady for the tone and approach that she has taken in relation to this matter. As I said in my own statement, I think this is an issue which across the House we all feel we have this opportunity to do something that can deal with the terrible abuses, the terrible crimes that have taken place in the past, and learn the lessons that are necessary for the future. Because as we have seen with the recent reports into Rotherham and the report from the Honourable Lady from Stockport in relation to Greater Manchester, these are not issues that have gone away. We continue to see abuse taking place today, and we continue to see failures, sadly, in our institutions, some of them the very institutions that children should expect to be able to trust to protect them from these sorts of crimes. She asked a number of questions. In relation to the engagement with survivors, as I indicated, I will myself be meeting with survivors groups. The Secretariat to the panel inquiry have already also started some separate meetings with survivors groups, and as I indicated, there will be further opportunities for such meetings and for some open forums in different parts of the country where it will be possible for people to come forward. I recognise the importance of that process. I think it's an important part of the process that the panel inquiry will be undertaking. I believe it will be possible to find an individual who is able to chair this inquiry. Of course, it is necessary that that individual has the confidence of the survivors and has the skill set required to lead a team, which is what the nature of the panel inquiry is all about. This is not about one person as chairman making decisions. It's about a team of people with different expertise and experience. Some of them, as I said, survivors of child abuse themselves, who are on the panel, coming together to ensure that we can get to the truth. She asked me a specific question about the drafting process of the letters, whether I was aware of that drafting process. I was not. I have checked with my special advisors. They were only aware that a letter was being written. They had no knowledge of its different iterations and had no part in drafting or redrafting the letter. She made reference to the need for transparency in a number of areas, and of course in relation to the National Crime Agency as well. I think the work that the National Crime Agency has been doing, particularly the over 700 arrests now we've seen in Op Notarise, is an important sign of the seriousness with which they take these particular issues. And as she will be aware, the Director General of the National Crime Agency, Keith Bristow, has made a number of comments now about the significance and the size of the potential problem that we face in this country. It is shocking. I'm sure that every member of this House is appalled by the size and nature of these crimes that we see. I believe that the National Crime Agency is being open about the work that it is undertaking in relation to that, and we owe it to the survivors of historic child abuse, but also I'll respond.
Mr. Vaz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I also welcome the tone and content of the Home Secretary's statement, which draws a line on the flawed process that we've seen so far and gives hope to the victims who've been waiting for this inquiry. The Select Committee, of course, accepts the Home Secretary's proposal that we should conduct pre-appointment hearings, and this may well be a precedent in the future for parliamentary scrutiny of public inquiries. Can she tell the House, in the meantime, she's set a very ambitious programme for this panel. It's right that they should start their work every Wednesday till Christmas. Who will chair those proceedings, or will the chair rotate between the panel members? And I'm glad she's publishing the Butler-Sloss report. We hope to examine both gentlemen next week at the committee. Will she assure the House that there are no other documents that are relevant to this inquiry that have not been published, and that she, if they are, that she will make them available to the committee and to the panel?
In relation to the ongoing work of the panel inquiry, my intention is that, it would be possible for me to appoint somebody from within the existing panel membership to chair it on an interim basis. I think that is a discussion that needs to be held with the members of the panel so that they are comfortable with any arrangements going forward, and they themselves will have proposals as to how they wish to conduct the work that they're going to take place. I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman and to the Select Committee for being willing to take this process on board and to hold this pre-confirmation hearing. I think it is important, I asked for it to be done because I think it's important that we see a public element of this appointment so that that can further guarantee the confidence of survivors in the process. As to documents, it is certainly my intention that all documents, certainly from the government, obviously should be made available to the inquiry. I caution the Right Honourable Gentleman in that obviously it will be for the inquiry themselves to consider the appropriateness of publication of some of the material that is put before them. That is the same process, for example, that the Hillsborough inquiry went through. There were some matters which they considered for a range of reasons, obviously in relation to individuals, that they discussed with the individuals. And it may be that there are matters of that sort that the panel would not wish to see being aired in public.
Maria Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the whole House will, I think, welcome the determination of the Home Secretary to get the truth. Can she reassure constituents who've contacted me, who are victims of child abuse, that this inquiry will start its work as quickly as possible and that the appointment of the chair won't cause unnecessary delay? I think victims deserve answers and they're concerned about the delay that they're seeing.
I can give my right honourable friend reassurance. We had previously been waiting for the chairman to be in place before the inquiry set forth on its work. I think it is important that it does start now. It is possible for it to start, as I say, because it is a panel of members. It's possible for it to start without a chairman. I think everybody in this House wants to see this work started, to get it going so that we can see results coming from the work of the inquiry, because that is what is due to survivors, and I'm sure that will be a sentiment that will be supported across the whole House.
And Coffey.
I also welcome the Home Secretary's statement. One of the shocking facts in historic child abuse cases is that institutional and wider public attitudes at the time enabled abusers to prey on children at will because children weren't listened to. Does she agree with me that part of this inquiry's job in learning from the past must be to bring forward recommendations about how we tackle wider cultural attitudes that mean that vulnerable children are still too often being blamed for their own abuse because of how they look or what they wear?
Absolutely agree with the comments of the Honourable Lady. I think what has been shocking in the Rotherham case, what has been shocking in the report that she made into Greater Manchester, but also we've seen this in the historic cases, is the fact that those who were being abused often raised their voices but were not heard because they were not believed, or because, and I think this is truly shocking, people felt that those young people were in a circumstance such that they should not be listened to, and somehow, as she said, they had sort of been in some sense, this was just the sort of thing that happened to those sorts of young people. I think this is an appalling attitude. We have seen it, and sadly, we see it still today in the work that is being done out there, as she has revealed. We see police officers, we see people in social services, we see others almost casting to one side certain individuals and not being willing to take up their case. It is time that people looked not at the credibility of the individual, but at the credibility of the allegation.
Andrew Lansley.
Thank you, Speaker. I welcome what the Home Secretary had to say about the panel proceeding with its work, but they do depend in part upon the results of other inquiries into institutions, including Kate Lampard in the NHS and Dame Janet Smith in the BBC. Can she tell the House any more about the progress in the production of those reports? And clearly the panel will be able to access disclosure of documents, but they may wish, I think we should assume that they will wish to go beyond that to independent investigations. Can she tell the House what kind of investigative resources would be available to the panel should they seek it?
My right honourable friend is right. I'm not able to give him an absolute timeline on the other reports that he referred to, but I'm very happy to write to him or for the Secretaries of State responsible for those departments affected by those inquiries to write to him to indicate what is where they are at the moment. It is important that all the evidence that is brought before this panel inquiry is available to them, and obviously they will be doing that, both looking at historic cases, but also as reviews become available, looking into those reviews. As far as investigations take place, it is not the task of the inquiry to determine criminal or civil liability for any individual. That is a matter that where it is the case that allegations are made against an individual as a perpetrator, those allegations will be passed to the police. There will be an ability through setting up various processes to ensure that allegations go to the police and are properly dealt with. So the investigation into specific allegations will be a matter for the police.
Mr. Simon Dancher.
Speaker, and can I also welcome the Home Secretary's statement? Will the Home Secretary agree with me that the role of the Home Office in the redrafting of Fiona Woolf's letter in many ways displays the kind of self-preservation instincts held by the Home Office that got us into this mess in the first place? Who instructed the civil servants to assist Fiona Woolf in redrafting that letter?
The process, as I understand it, was that Fiona Woolf wanted to ensure that she was as transparent as possible in the information that she gave in the letter that she sent to me, and therefore went through a number of drafts in order to ensure that all information was available. As I've indicated, I was not aware of those iterations of drafts of the letter. I think it is important that we have ensured that there is a transparency from Fiona Woolf, but also, of course, other members of the panel were also asked to write to me to indicate whether there were any matters that they felt should be known and people should be aware of before the panel started its work.
Dr. Julian Huppert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the Home Secretary's tone? It is absolutely right that survivors must have confidence in the work of this inquiry. But can I press her about Kincora's boys' home and Northern Ireland? In this statement she says she will not expand the terms of reference to cover that. But I understand last week she wrote to the First Minister of Northern Ireland saying that if there wasn't enough cooperation from the security services, then she would seek agreement to bring it inside the terms of reference. Could you be clear on what is likely to happen there?
I say to my honourable friend that I'm not able to look ahead and see how this is going to progress, but I am very clear that we need to ensure that the information that is available to Sir Anthony Hart is all the information that he needs to be able to undertake his investigation into Kincora. As I've been clear today, I'm very clear that we need to ensure that nothing happens that means that any information, any individual slips between the cracks of the two pieces of work of these inquiries, and that is why we will be looking at talking to the panel inquiry about what needs to be in place to ensure that information can be exchanged where it is relevant to both, and that precisely that we don't see somebody able to slip through the cracks because there are two inquiries.
John Watson.
Can I thank the Home Secretary for putting survivors at the centre of this? It was a very personal statement, and I'm sure will be appreciated. In a previous statement, she said that there would be a mechanism found to allow panel members access to intelligence service files where relevant. Could she give a little bit more detail on how progress is going on that front?
Yes, and I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, who obviously also, as a member of this House, has campaigned long and hard on this issue on behalf of survivors. We are looking, this is an issue that we have looked at in relation to Kincora Boys Home, and we're also looking at it in relation to this panel inquiry. It is my expectation and intention that all government agencies will make information available to the inquiry when they are requested to do so, and we are in the process of working out the protocol that will ensure that that is possible between, as I say, all agencies and the inquiry, so that no stone is left unturned.
Mr. Michael Ellis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I commend the Home Secretary joining others for her tone, and also the tone of the opposition front bench too, but particularly to commend her for setting up this inquiry in the first place. By doing that, she has transcended the issues of the past, and we hope to get to some truths, some very important truths. What has not often been spoken about is the vast experience and expertise of the inquiry panel members as they currently exist. They bring with them a vast amount of experience, including in 2 individuals' cases. They are themselves survivors. Could she express confidence in the panel as it currently exists? And can I commend her for the factoring in the crucial nature of survivors being at the forefront of this whole exercise?
I thank my honourable friend for his comments, and he is absolutely right. We brought the panel members together precisely because they have a breadth of experience, a breadth of expertise. So there are individuals, indeed, as he says, like Graham Wilmer, who established the Lantern Project, who is himself a survivor and who has worked to help and support other survivors. But there are also individuals like Professor Pearce, who have been working in an academic sense in looking at these issues, and others from the Health Service, Drew Sharpling, of course, who is an Inspector of Constabulary, who brings the law enforcement angle into this. There is a significant amount of expertise and individual experience in the members of the panel, and it is the coming together of all of those that I believe mean that this inquiry panel will be able to get to the truth.
Mr. Ian Paisley.
Mr. Speaker, can I too add my voice to those who appreciate the sincerity of the Home Secretary and what she has said today? No one doubts that for one moment. However, it's unlikely most people get a second chance, let alone a third chance, to get something right. And would the Home Secretary listen very carefully to the representations made unanimously by the Select Affairs Committee on Home Affairs here, and by the Northern Ireland Assembly unanimously, which is a difficult enough task to get in its own right, where they want to have Kincora included in this inquiry? We should get that matter right also.
I recognise the concern that the honourable gentleman has about the Kincora inquiry, and I recognise that there have been representations, and indeed the First Minister made representations to me himself about including Kincora. As I've indicated, what I want to ensure is that the Hart inquiry can do its work and have access to all the information that it needs to have access to, and that there is no question that there is in any sense any problems or any individuals who are able to escape, or institutions that are able to escape attention as a result of there being the 2 inquiries. But for a number of reasons, including, and not least, the fact that obviously any inquiry that is undertaken under the panel inquiry work here, which currently covers England and Wales, would not be able to require changes in Northern Ireland, because of course this is a devolved matter and not a reserved matter. But I think we're all of one agreement, which is that we want to make sure that these inquiries all get to the truth, and that nobody can, and no institution can slip through the net.
Garnier.
Could I urge my right honourable friend to think about the suggestion made by our honourable friend for Stowe about setting up a statutory inquiry as soon as possible? I appreciate what she says about waiting for the appointment of the chairman, but as soon as that chairman is appointed, would my right honourable friend consult with him or her to transfer it across to the statutory system? Much better to do it now rather than later when we're halfway through the process. And would she also perhaps consider appointing or urging the appointment of a senior, either currently serving or recently retired senior judge who has family law, children's law, historic sex abuse experience, so that we can have a chairman of the inquiry who brings with them authority and who will command respect.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his proposal. In relation to the statutory inquiry, the process is that it will be, once a chairman is in place, it will be for them to determine whether they wish this to become a statutory inquiry. But as I've made absolutely clear, and I don't think I can be any clearer, that if they feel that it is necessary in order to be able to compel witnesses and have the other powers of a statutory inquiry, then indeed the government will respond to that. As to the sort of individual who should be appointed to this, the important aspect of this is that it is somebody who everybody who is dealing with this inquiry is able to have confidence in, and crucially, obviously, that the survivors are able to have confidence in, that being the issue which, as Fiona Woolf wrote to me, led to her resigning.
Paul Flynn. In making the progress that we all want, will the Home Secretary consider the names I've sent to her of two sensitive, greatly experienced people in this field who can't be classed with the metropolitan elite in any way? And can we not move away from this without considering the serious situation where there were 7 versions of a letter? The first one presented to the committee, the first one which wasn't presented to the committee, gave an impression of a close friendship between the Britons and Fiona Woolf, but the final version suggested they were almost strangers. Isn't this an attempt by civil service to mislead that committee and from that mislead the House? What you going to do about this?
I don't believe there was any attempt to mislead the House. The letter that I received was the letter that Fiona Woolf agreed, and I believe that she was intending to be as transparent as possible in that letter about the nature of her relationship with the noble Lord of Britain. I am willing to accept, I'm sure there are members of this House, many members of this House, who may have proposals for individuals who would be appropriate for the chairmanship, and I will certainly look at the names that the honourable gentleman wishes to send to me.
Mr. Steve Baker.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome my right honourable friend's desire to see the committee's work start as soon as possible. But does she share my concern that the longer their work continues, the harder it will be for a chair to pick up that work and assert themselves? Could I just press her to explain a little further the extent to which she's considered asking a panel member to take the chair?
I understand the point my honourable friend makes. We will be looking at a variety of names for the potential chair. Of course, some, as my honourable friend has done, have suggested that we look from within the panel membership themselves for that. But as the honourable member for Newport has just indicated, there are also other suggestions that others wish to make. It is a fine judgment, but obviously I want to ensure that the process is done in a way which makes sure that when the appointment is made, it is somebody who has full confidence and can carry on the work of the inquiry. But as my honourable friend has also said, of course, that process must not take so long that the individual becomes difficult for the individual to pick up the work of the inquiry. So we will be operating in the knowledge of both of those aspects.
Mr. David Winnick.
However much the distinguished legal experience were of the two people originally chosen, why did she decide to restrict her choice to a very, very small part of Westminster? And on reflection, wouldn't it have been better for her to have consulted, as she intends to do now, and I welcome that, but wouldn't it have been better if she had done that from the very start into this very serious issue?
I say to the honourable gentleman, I did not restrict my choice, as he is suggesting, to a very small part of Westminster, as I already indicated in response to the question from his right honourable friend, the member for Blackburn. We did indeed look outside the United Kingdom as well, and I'm willing to do that again.
Sir Oliver Heald.
In joining in the welcome to the Home Secretary's approach and tone, can I ask this, that in the preparatory work and the taking of evidence which she's announced that the panel will be doing,
can it be borne in mind that there may come a time when the chairman, having been appointed, wants to make a decision under the 2005 Act? And would it therefore be possible to ensure that the work of the panel is constructed in such a way that it avoids possible later duplication? Because that, I think, is very much the point my right honourable friend from Stone was making, that it might be necessary to recall witnesses and so on. And I think if the panel had that in mind, it would be very useful.
My right honourable friend has made a very practical suggestion about the operation of the panel inquiry, and that is certainly one which I will take on board.
Diane Abbott.
The Home Secretary will be aware that very many survivors of sex abuse were genuinely frightened and upset at the notion of Fiona Wolf chairing a panel. Mr. Alex Whittle, who experienced child abuse in the Shirley Oaks home in Croydon, wrote in The Independent to that effect. So it's for the best that she has now withdrawn. But on the question of security services, if the security services refuse to supply information, or if they supply information that is so heavily redacted that it is worse than useless, what recourse will the chair of the inquiry have?
I say to the Honourable Lady, as I said when I made the statement in July, and as I have repeated here, I've been very clear to all the agencies involved that it is the expectation and the intention that they should make evidence available to the inquiry. Of course, as I've just been discussing in relation, or has been asked from a number of questions, referred to in a number of questions, there is the question that the chairman will have to consider as to whether this is a non-statutory inquiry or a statutory inquiry with the powers to compel witnesses that a statutory inquiry would have. But I wish to reiterate that across the whole of government, I believe we have an opportunity to address this issue, to find out what happened in the past, to find out the failings, and to ensure that we can learn the lessons for the future. That is what I expect every part of government to do.
Mr. Duncan Haynes.
I thank the Home Secretary for her statement and her support for this inquiry, and look forward to the publication of the Wanless-Wissam report into their review next week. Can she confirm for the House that the reason for the delay in the publication of that report is exclusively those she gave in her statement, and that officials in her department are not engaged in redacting any material from that report that they do not consider suitable for placing in the public domain?
I can assure my honourable friend that in fact I will assure my honourable friend that there are two reasons why the report is not being published, has not yet been published. One is, and is not being published today, one is, as I said in my statement, I'm very clear that I think it's important that that is published separately, so people can look at that separately and can look at this statement and what is coming, what I've announced today separately, and consider them both properly. But it is also the case that I have asked, I mean, it's not just a formality for me to receive a report of that sort. I have actually given it consideration. I have asked some questions to ensure that the report and the work actually has addressed the terms of reference that were given.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I particularly welcome the fact that the Home Secretary will be consulting with the survivor groups before appointing a chair, but can I press her on the terms of reference a little further? Could she confirm that they can be amended and broadened as the inquiry progresses if new evidence comes to light that suggests new avenues to be covered, not just insofar as Jersey is concerned, but in terms of any other direction that the evidence might suggest?
We're very clear in the terms of reference in relation to one particular aspect, which was the time frame that we have set, that it would be open to the inquiry panel to come forward if they wish to extend that time frame. I mean, if it is the case, what I am very keen to ensure, and I'm sure other members of this House, is that the terms of reference are such that the inquiry is able to do its work and do it within a reasonable timescale, so that we can actually see some answers coming, because we owe that not just to survivors, but if there are lessons to be learned and actions that need to be taken to protect children currently and in the future, we need to see those lessons and be able to put those actions into place. But of course, if the chairman and the panel were to come to the point where they felt that their terms of reference were such that there was an important aspect that they were not able to consider, that was preventing them from getting to the truth, then of course the government would look at that.
Sir Tony Baldry.
Quite rightly set very broad terms of reference so that nothing gets excluded, and has quite rightly set a very wide timescale so nothing can be excluded. But it is going to require the panel, considering the behaviour over many years of broadcasters, children's homes, churches, clubs, government agencies and organisations, hospitals, schools, youth organisations and others. And doesn't the House have to recognise that this is a Herculean task and that we have to be patient, that this isn't work, if it's going to be done properly, that can be done instantly. It is going to take a little time. And there is a trade-off between having broad terms of reference and a wide period of examination and actually the time it takes for the work to be done.
My honourable friend makes a very, very important point, and I think it is essential that we are able to ensure that the inquiry can get on with its work, and as I've just indicated in response to the Honourable Lady, the member for Brighton Pavilion, that we actually start to see results in terms of the analysis that they will be undertaking of what has gone wrong in the past and what is continuing to go wrong and what further lessons we need to learn. And we owe that not just to the survivors of past incidents of abuse, but we also owe it to those who are vulnerable and could be potential victims in the future.
Sherman.
I welcome the new start to the inquiry, but say to the Home Secretary, anyone who looked at the Baby Peter documentary last week will know what a difficult area this is in terms of just in that simple area getting to the truth of what really happened about the death of one child. But can I say to her that what we do need out of this committee is not only independence, but we need it to be rigorous to find out who the perpetrators are, because this is a national scandal. But we should also bear in mind that during my time as chair of the relevant committee, I found some deeply damaged people who were the victims of false allegations of abuse. It destroyed them, destroyed their careers, destroyed their families. So getting the balance right in this and not having a hue and cry is absolutely essential.
The right honourable gentleman, I think, makes a very important point. What is essential is that the results of this inquiry are those in which everybody can have confidence to ensure that it has got to the truth. As he says, it is very difficult in this area to identify what has happened. But I would say that we have seen, I think, in the reports of child abuse in Rotherham and in the report from his honourable friend, the member for Stockport, some good examples recently of people Professor Alex J and the honourable member, who've gone out and actually been able to identify real failings in institutions that are taking place, sadly, still taking place today.
Charlotte. Leslie.
The question from the Honourable Member for Stone and others. I thank the Secretary of State for assurances there is potential for the inquiry to be statutory. But given that those potentially implicated may be absolutely embedded deep in the marrow bone of establishment, wouldn't she agree that this inquiry, in order to gain confidence of the survivors, imbue fear into perpetrators who may think they're untouchable, and also to protect existing and future potential victims, this inquiry must have teeth right from the start, not be dependent on a chair's discretion, and give it to the establishment itself that's under investigation, these teeth may have to be very long and very sharp indeed.
Well, I agree that we want to ensure that the panel is actually able to get to the truth, and in this area, and particularly looking at historic cases, this is not an easy task, and they are going to have to be prepared to go wherever the evidence is leading them in relation to this particular issue. Just one point, my honourable friend made reference to the discretion of the chair. The point of having the panel is that it is not the discretion of the chair that will determine where this inquiry goes. It is not the discretion of the chair that will determine who is called to give evidence or what reviews are considered. That will be for the panel as a whole, which is why I think it's important to have the breadth of expertise that we have on the panel.
Liz McInnes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's absolutely right that the emphasis should be on support for survivors, but could the Home Secretary give more detail about the Survivors Liaison Group, how they will be set up, and more importantly for me, will there be representation from my constituency of Hayward and Middleton?
It's my first opportunity to welcome the Honourable Lady to the House. and she's already standing up for her constituents, as she has just indicated. I don't have the precise model of the Survivors Liaison Group available yet. I think it's important that this is one of the issues that I will discuss with survivors groups as to how that liaison group should be operated and how it will be done in order to ensure that it has confidence from the survivors and is able to input to the extent to which we wish it to. And on that basis, I'm afraid I'm not able to confirm who will be on it and therefore which part of the country it will be from.
David Rutsley. Mr. Speaker, I welcome my right honourable friend's statement and also her heartfelt commitment to seeing the panel process move further forward, the inquiry process. I also welcome the announcement that the panel inquiry will be able to take evidence remotely, which is vitally important given the victims' experiences. Can my right honourable friend tell the House when the inquiry panel will be able to use this innovative and appropriate approach? Because I think all members of this House, with her, are keen to move this inquiry forward as fast as possible.
Well, we are keen to ensure that we get the technology in place as soon as possible so that the inquiry panel can, for those who wish to do so, be able to take evidence remotely. I'm sure my honourable friend will recognise, though, we do need to ensure the security of that process when the matters that are being dealt with are as personal as they will be for survivors. I think it's absolutely right that we get in place not just the technology, we ensure that that technology is secure.
Nia Griffith.
Indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker. Well, the Home Secretary has very clearly stressed the importance of current protection for children. Oh, sorry, Mr Speaker, did I? So, anyway, the Home Secretary has very, very importantly stressed the importance of current protection for children. And what I would like to ask her is, in the appalling case of the Deputy Head Teacher from Cardiff in Wales, who was jailed this year in May for having filmed children secretly in toilets. It turns out that the National Crime Agency actually did not pass on details about this man for a whole 19 months to the South Wales Police. Now, I'd like to ask her about the 20,000 individuals on whom the NCA has information that they've accessed child abuse on the internet, and the fact that only 700 of those have been prosecuted. What is she going to do to ensure progress is made in dealing with this issue so that children can be better protected?
Well, I think from the timeline that she's set out that the information that she refers to would initially have been with CEOP before the National Crime Agency was established. The National Crime Agency has been very clear. They obviously have, in terms of the numbers they've been talking about, of the numbers of people who they have identified who have been looking at child abuse images. Under the National Crime Agency, more people are having action taken against them who are looking at child abuse images. In the last year, that's something like over 1,000 people have had action taken against them. And obviously, Notarise has led to the arrest of over 700, investigation of over 700 individuals. So the National Crime Agency is working. It is ensuring that every case that comes to it is looked at and is considered, and that appropriate action is taken. It prioritises those which are of the greatest potential harm to children.
Mr Nigel Evans.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the Home Secretary for the compassion and understanding that she has displayed today towards the survivors and her drive in setting up this inquiry. The scope and nature of this inquiry is unprecedented, and she's talked about a reasonable timescale, but it may take some time, and she's recognised that child sex abuse is taking place today. Should the panel come forward with some recommendations early on which could help stamp this horrific child sex abuse out, would she give them the opportunity, perhaps via an interim report, to bring those recommendations to her so that she could consider them?
My honourable friend, I think, makes a very important point. I had indicated when I gave the statement in July that I would expect the panel to make an interim report before the general election. Obviously, the timescales have now shortened for that time. One of the things I think the inquiry panel will want to look at, and I believe should look at, is the question of how it can report through its process So both that people can see the work that it is doing, which I think will reinforce the confidence that survivors and others can have in the process, but also I would expect if it comes across issues upon which it feels action should be taken sooner rather than later, that it will report those so that that action can be followed through.
Mr. Michael Nietzsche.
There isn't an important dimension of this scandal, and the Home Secretary signed off on all of this, that her department made 2 utterly inappropriate establishment-ridden appointments, and then to cap it all, drafted and redrafted a letter 7 times in order to play down and disguise the relationship between Fiona Woolf and Lord Britton, who was then Home Secretary, when all the Home Office files on this alleged Westminster and Whitehall child sex abuse mysteriously disappeared. And can she not understand that despite that background, or because of that background, and despite her words today, which I welcome, she has already lost the confidence of many of the public about her capacity to conduct a highly sensitive inquiry of this kind in a properly objective and impartial manner?
Well, I'm afraid I have to say to the right honourable gentleman that I don't accept the premise of much of what he has said in his question. I mean, just for example, he said that all the Home Office files relating to these matters had gone missing. That is not the case. He has made a number of other references. All I would say to him, finally in answer to his question, is this. I am not conducting this inquiry. I have established this inquiry. I have done so because of my concern about both the historic cases and the continuing cases we see of child abuse and child sexual exploitation in this country. We should be ashamed of what we see, what has happened in the past, and what we see, sadly, happening on our streets today. The inquiry panel will be conducting, as I said, what I believe is a once-in-a-generation inquiry, which gives us that opportunity to recognise the problems, to recognise the failings of the past, and to make sure that looking ahead to the future, we would address those failings so that in future we see fewer children becoming victim to this appalling crime.
Whilst acknowledging and welcoming the huge cross-party support for this most important inquiry, does the Home Secretary agree that the Shadow Home Secretary's complaint that this government has not been listening to the voices of victims would have rather more resonance had this inquiry been instituted under the last Labour government rather than falling to this government to institute an investigation into child abuse?
I note the point that my honourable friend has made. I would simply make 2 points to him. It is, of course, this government that has set up this inquiry, but as I did earlier, I did commend the tone with which the Shadow Home Secretary had approached her response to this statement, and I think across the House, the overwhelming view of this House is that we want this inquiry to get on and do its work.
Williams.
Speaker, in the 893 pages of the Waterhouse report into child abuse in North Wales, there are only 5 references to the Welsh language. All refer to various management issues, all are negative in tone to varying degrees, none are directly in respect of survivors' experiences. So in the spirit of listening properly to survivors, will the Home Secretary ensure that this new inquiry, whoever chairs it, gives proper and active consideration to the issue of the languages used by survivors, Welsh, English or community languages?
The honourable gentleman makes an interesting point which has not been raised with me before. What I would say to him is that I would expect the panel inquiry to ensure that they are able to take evidence from all survivors who wish to give evidence to them and recognise that for some that may wish to be in a language that is not English.
There's a moment.
Speaker, I'd like to welcome the Home Secretary's statement and to thank her for taking the time and trouble to consult with my colleagues and me. And for recognising the importance of trust in the process. Can she expand a little on her thoughts about having the 6 regional events and their place in the process, and on balancing the protection for survivors against what can be a slightly intrusive press, and making sure there are services to support those survivors like counselling?
My honourable friend makes some important points. I think the intention of the Secretariat and the panel in having the regional events is to ensure that access to the panel, that the panel is more accessible for people across England and Wales, and to make it easier for people to be able to give evidence. As I've said, they will also be ensuring that evidence can be given remotely in order to recognise that for some it will be difficult to come to a hearing of some sort. I would expect also that the inquiry panel will want to look at the balance between those occasions where they take evidence in public and those where they take it in private. For many survivors, they may wish to give their evidence in private, and I would expect the inquiry panel to be able to recognise that and to deal with it. And it is the case that the Secretariat are talking to Department of Health officials about the counselling and support that should be available to victims, not just after they've given evidence, but potentially before they give evidence too.
Mrs. Sharon Hodgson.
Following on from that question, and also from my honourable friend who welcomed the survivors, the survivors liaison group also. I too was wanting to. I know the honourable lady said she hasn't got further details available at present, but I wondered if she thought around such things such as practical support to be available for the survivors who will want to travel to London to give evidence or to be part of the survivors liaison group, as well as psychological support that they may need in the terms of counselling when they have to relive and recount what will obviously be a very traumatic experience for them.
Yes, we are indeed considering those aspects. I think it is commendable that the Secretariat have already indicated that they wish to have some regional events so that people don't have to come to London to give their views. And I would expect, although they've announced a number of events, obviously, over the coming months, given the length of time that it will take for the inquiry to take place, I would expect that that is a matter that they will return to, because everybody wants to ensure that survivors are able to give their input to the work of the panel inquiry, but recognise also that for many that will be traumatic, it will be difficult, and it will be necessary to build trust so that survivors do feel they're able to come forward and do so.
Mr. Philip Holloway.
To what extent have other countries undertaken historic child sex abuse inquiries? What are the key lessons to be learnt, and has any nation ever embarked on as ambitious an inquiry as the Home Secretary has set out?
I'm aware that there have been some abuse inquiries that have taken place in other countries. Australia is one country that comes to mind. I would expect that I can't say what the panel inquiry is going to do in terms of the work that we'll look at. I think they might very well wish to look to see if there are lessons that can be learned from work that has been done elsewhere, as well as looking at the reviews that have taken place. I'm not aware of such a wide breadth of inquiry, both in terms of the type of matter it's dealing with, but also, of course, the historical span that this particular inquiry has.
Mr. John Mann.
Mr. Speaker, next week's one of these new parliamentary half-holiday weeks. Can the Home Secretary confirm that she will make a statement on the Wanless report in order that members of the House can ask her questions in relation to it?
Yeah.
I would ensure that the Wanless report is available to members of this House. As to whether or not I make a statement, that the honourable gentleman will have to wait, and business will be announced as usual.
Mark Durkin.
I know that the sensitivity expressed to survivors extends also to those victims who unfortunately have not been able to survive to this point as well. The Home Secretary knows that many of us in Northern Ireland are not persuaded by the line call in respect of Kincora, but regardless of whether people are possibly giving evidence to the Hart inquiry or to the panel inquiry, who will make the call in relation to the Official Secrets Act? She has referred here to agencies who will cooperate. Will those agencies control the evidence that might be given by former officers or agents, or will they be able to give evidence to these inquiries on an unfettered, unfiltered basis?
I indicated earlier in response to another question that was asked from the benches, we are currently in the process of looking at the protocols that will need to be in place to ensure that the evidence that needs to be available to these inquiries will be.
Lillian Greenwood.
Speaker, my constituents who are subject to abuse at Beechwood and other children's homes in Nottinghamshire have already waited long enough for their voices to be heard. I welcome the Home Secretary's assurance she will listen to survivors, but will she also ensure that Nottinghamshire Police have sufficient resources to conduct their ongoing criminal investigations in a timely manner so that survivors secure justice?
I recognise that there are a number of forces around the country who are conducting current investigations, both into current issues of child abuse, but also some conducting investigations into historic cases. And I have been discussing with the National Policing Lead on these matters, who is Chief Constable Simon Bailey from Norfolk, matters relating to resources.
Mr. Steve McCabe.
I'm sure that most people now want to see the inquiry proceed without any further setbacks. But given the unfortunate circumstances surrounding the choice of persons to chair it, is the Home Secretary absolutely certain that all other members of the panel have been thoroughly checked and that there's nothing in their backgrounds or contacts that could lead people subsequently to question whether or not they're the right person to serve on this particular panel?
I say to the Honourable Gentleman that, of course, due diligence was done on the members of the panel. In addition, as I indicated earlier, each member of the panel has written to me with an indication as to whether or not they believe there are contacts or matters that would affect the inquiry that they're being part of, and those letters are available.
Mr. Michael McCann.
Speaker, nearly 900 men have made complaints to County Durham Police Force about the abuse they suffered as youngsters at the Midhamsley Detention Centre in the 1970s and 1980s. Can the Secretary of State confirm that the terms of reference of the inquiry will be wide enough to include an examination of government-endorsed abuse, such as short, sharp shock treatment introduced by a previous administration?
Yeah. The inquiry panel will be looking at all reviews and all issues that have been raised in relation to historic child abuse, and it is absolutely my intention to ensure that all, as I've said earlier, all government departments and agencies make sure that evidence is available to the inquiry panel that they wish to see and that they need to see in order to be able to undertake their duties properly and to be able to look at the historic cases of child abuse, but also at the more recent cases of child abuse.
Angela Smith.
Can I ask the Home Secretary to tell the House why the Home Office felt it necessary to remove a specific reference in the early drafts of Fiona Woolf's letter to allegations of child sex abuse in Edinburgh?
The letter that I received from Fiona Woolf was the letter that Fiona Woolf agreed, signed off and ensured, as far as I'm aware, that it was as transparent as possible to ensure that all information that was appropriate was in that letter.
Very good.
The Home Secretary has indicated that Fiona Woolf made her letter of disclosure available to the department for review in order to ensure that she fulfilled her obligation for transparency. The problem her department has is that in the 7 successive reiterations of that letter, it became less rather than more transparent. Will she ask the Permanent Secretary to interview the senior official in the department who effected those changes and who initiated those changes in consultation with Fiona Woolf, and ensure that at each stage that civil servant can explain why those changes were suggested to Fiona Woolf and whether they did in fact increase or reduce transparency?
The Honourable Gentleman has made a number of assumptions about the process. I reiterate what I have said earlier. Fiona Woolf wrote to me with the intention of being as transparent as possible about any issues and connections that she felt it was appropriate to refer to me, and during the course, obviously, it has been shown that there were a number of issues, that the number of drafts that the Secretariat looked at. The letter that came to me was the letter that Fiona Woolf agreed.
Kevin McCarthy.
Mr. Speaker, the two cases of grooming that I've dealt with during my time as an MP, looking at the issue of preventing future child abuse, they both involved 15-year-old girls in relationships with men which the police and other agencies simply described as them having bad taste in boyfriends. And there was almost a countdown to their 16th birthday when they thought they could wash their hands of them. Does the Home Secretary agree with me that even if they deem the presenters being in a relationship, that is still very clearly a case of child abuse? And this is something we ought to be seeking to prevent too.
Well, I think this is another example of what I was talking about earlier, and her honourable friend, the member for Stockport, was raising about an attitude to young people that has dismissed some of those instances, and it can very well be the case where a girl, as she says, of 15 may be in an abusive relationship, and that needs to be considered as an abusive relationship, and the allegations need to be considered properly, rather than simply dismissing it because of the age of the individual. And I think everybody needs to recognise there is an age of consent, and below that age of consent, people should be looking very seriously at the allegations that are brought forward.
Debbie Abrahams.
One of the conclusions from my friend's report, the member for Stockport's report, is that we need to address the cultural issues that underpin much of this abuse, including the sexualisation of children as young as primary school age. Will the government on that basis be reconsidering their opposition to compulsory personal and social health and education, including age-appropriate relationship and sex education?
I say to the Honourable Lady that I am having a number of discussions with the Department of Education, and I understand that the Secretary of State for Education is looking at the advice that is available in relation to personal, social and health education. There are a number of issues that have been discussed over time in this House that come under that particular heading, and we all want to ensure that young people and that children are being given appropriate advice and appropriate guidance.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Speaker, I commend the Home Secretary particularly for the remarks she made earlier about assessing the credibility of the accusations rather than the credibility of either the accuser or the accused. I think that's a very, very important starting point to take from this. Also, she seemed to indicate that there would be some degree of interim reporting, which I welcome, because this is clearly going to be a massive undertaking. Does she envisage that this whole inquiry could indeed turn into almost a standing commission on these issues, which might not be a bad thing, because it might be necessary in the longer term? And finally, in the case of my own borough, there have been complaints about Islington Children's Homes in the past. The council has investigated them. The council is in a very different place, but nevertheless welcomes this inquiry, will cooperate with it. But as she's fully aware, many of the children that were abused in homes also went to homes in other parts of the country, and in some cases the Channel Islands. So it's very important that the inquiry is able to investigate across local authority administrative areas and indeed across jurisdictions in the case of what tragically happened in the Channel Islands to many very vulnerable young children who were taken to homes there.
The honourable gentleman for his comments and for the remarks he made about Islington Council and their willingness to participate in the work of the inquiry. The idea that he suggests about a standing commission is not one that has been raised before. My only comment is that I believe that while it will take some time for the panel inquiry to be able to complete their work, I would hope that we would not... I don't want to see a situation where there is an expectation that it just carries on and carries on and carries on, and potentially that we lose the impact of its report and, crucially, the ability to act on the findings that it has. But I think it is right that I would expect it to be making some interim reports, both, as I said, in a response to my honourable friend earlier, so that any actions can be that are necessary can be undertaken as soon as possible, but also so that survivors and others are able to see the ongoing work and then continue to have confidence in the work of the particular of the panel inquiry.
Mr. Gordon-Marsden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Home Secretary, in my view, quite rightly has asked the Select Committee to have a pre-appointment scrutiny panel but she's also mentioned the issue of involvement of survivors. And I wonder if she would reflect on further on the way in which the involvement of survivors in the selection process could come more closely to the public part of the confirmation with the Select Committee, so that their confidence and so that our confidence that we do not have a third stumble along the way could be improved.
I will certainly reflect on the process that we would put in place in relation to survivors and how they are able to input. Of course, the decision that has to be taken ultimately will be my decision, but I'm trying to put parts of the process in place to ensure that people can have confidence that we have explored all avenues that it's necessary to explore in order to ensure that we can go forward.
Order. We begin